let's look at some numbers. Performance testing is tricky. Price and customer consideration impact our expectations. Also, a company's history is a good way to gauge how a new product might be improved over an older product. This is TCL's first branded phone, so there's nothing to really look back at. I guess I could throw this up against a BlackBerry, but that's a radically different software fight. Just to put these scores into some kind of context, I'll be including a few benches from last year's Pixel 3a, and I also want to play with a year-old phone where a brand new, not refurbished, not used LG G8 can often be found for around $450. Mid-ranger's toughest competition is often a year-old premium flagship. So let's see what TCL has to offer here. This is the 10 Pro by the benchmarks. As a baseline, we always want to start with some synthetic numbers, and I always think it's interesting to see how synthetic scores line up with real-world tests. In Geekbench, we arrive at a single-core score smack dab in between the Pixel 3a and the LG G8, with performance looking pretty close to premium Android flagships from around 2 years ago. The top-of-the-line 600 series Snapdragon looks pretty close to the single-core performance of a Snapdragon 845. Multi-core also gets a nice little bump over the Pixel 3a, but doesn't catch up as much to last year's premium chipset or the year before. I've got to travel back 3 years to see similar multi-core performance. Still in solid territory for a mid-ranger, but I was hoping to see just a touch more horsepower when firing up more cores. Software and optimization can have a significant impact on these tests, and it seems Google is able to eke out a bit more torque from a GPU looking at these phones side by side. And yeah, the G8 doesn't have any issues leapfrogging the two mid-rangers. That's always going to be one of the perks of buying a higher tier phone. You're going to get much better GPU performance. By a lot. So what does that mean for real-world tests? It means app developers don't have a lot of faith in these mid-priced devices. For example, I can't find a way to activate UHD video rendering on KineMaster. You can edit UHD files, but it's going to force you to render out at Quad HD. So I'll be focusing on PowerDirector, where the Pixel 3a struggled last year, but could complete some tests. I think this is important because these phones all shoot 4K video now. People might want to preserve their memories at the same quality they shot those memories. Call me crazy. For the render test, where we take 6 UHD video clips from my mirrorless camera, throw on a watermark, transitions, and a soundtrack, Google's optimization here takes a win in the render test by a very small lead. And of course, the year-old Android flagship can shave quite a bit of time off that score. The transcoding test, though, is a solid win for the TCL. Now, I like this streamlined test because it's a little more what a consumer would see if they were just cutting and splicing from one clip, not stitching a bunch of clips together or adding layers or effects. Oddly, though I would consider this to be less demanding than the render test, the fact that I use a much larger video file seems to be the deal breaker for the Pixel. The 3a cannot finish this test. PowerDirector pops out a render error. It's game over. The TCL is not fast, but it gets the job done on a really high quality video file from my mirrorless camera. The G8 completely murks the TCL, but I'm excited mid-ranger phones are now starting to finish this kind of test. That's decent improvement. Moving right along. Google's stabilization plugin for photos is such a great little tool to help you smooth out some shaky video. And here we see that the little spec bump against the Pixel helps deliver a slightly faster finish. And I'm also tracking RAR compression, and I love seeing real world versus synthetic scores. I'm still gonna make the argument that even a low-cost phone could help us displace some of our low-cost laptop use. RAR Lab shows a decent lead in synthetic scores for the TCL, but when actually running a longer compression test, the performance normalizes, and the 10 Pro only manages a slight win. 8 seconds on this scale is not a huge improvement, and you might even be able to close that gap if the barometric pressure were different when you run the test. Switching over to some gaming, as mentioned, one of the compromises you make in the mid-range in Android land is GPU performance. But I'm not overly concerned considering what I actually see in hand. Basically, we walk into this discussion knowing we've got to turn down some graphics settings, but maintaining a stable gaming experience is completely possible. An older cartoony dungeon looter, Eternium, this phone kept up a frame rate in the high 50s easily. With numerous enemies on screen, I rarely saw a dip below the low 50s. Checking out a great JRPG, Battle Chasers suffers the most. Combat sequences look okay, but this PC port has always struggled with map navigation, and it's really choppy here. Looking at Sky, Children of the Light, graphics also need to be turned down. You lose out on the eye candy, and here the phone often struggles to maintain a fluid frame rate, especially with longer play sessions. This is a game you want to lose yourself in, and these occasional twitches and stutters distract a bit more from the overall experience. Disappointing, but not surprising, because this is a very demanding mobile title. I hope the developers behind this game might find a way to offer an even lower graphics mode to help people on more modest hardware. But sticking with fantasy exploration, Bright Ridge is one of my favorite titles to show this off because you can dial in exactly the kind of graphic specs you might want. If we turn up all the quality settings, we're gonna get about 9 frames per second at best. But it's not hard dialing this stuff back to get real playable frame rates. Medium textures, restricting the draw distance, it's actually pretty solid. And happily, I saw terrific performance on Anima. I've been grinding a few hours on this Diablo wannabe and only see the occasional stutters on longer play sessions with lots of enemies on the screen. This is solid. I probably wouldn't bill gaming as a primary use, a top use for an Android mid-ranger, but it's still capable enough hardware to scratch a decent quality gaming itch. Anima also helps us start a battery life conversation, and this phone is a champ. Huge battery and medium power chipset. This thing runs forever. An hour of gaming on Anima only drained about 9% of the battery. My video streaming test used to be 30 minutes long. That's incredibly difficult to track on a phone like this. So, streaming an hour of HD video, I landed around a 5% drop. That's really good. Like, tied for first place with the OnePlus 8 Pro with the screen turned down to HD resolution, really good. You will not be hurting for runtime out in the field on this phone. And the recharge rate is pretty solid. Using the included charger, we topped off 40% of this battery plugged in for 30 minutes. So that's a decent place to wrap this up. How should we judge price to performance? The TCL 10 Pro looks a little less impressive in some of the heavier lifting tests, but we are seeing where mid-rangers continue to chip away at the premium flagship lead, where even last year, this series chipset was not capable of finishing some of my harder tests. Now this hardware is stepping up. There's a clear trend where a 600 series chipset performs well against a 2-year-old premium flagship, but we are in a market where a 1-year-old flagship can sometimes hit the same price window. Where this conversation is going to get a bit more interesting is looking at the phone as a whole. I'm sure my LG G8 doesn't struggle to outperform a TCL 10 Pro for video rendering, but the 10 Pro benefits from a much larger battery, has a newer, larger camera sensor, and both phones are likely in for one major operating system update. So we'll have to keep an eye out for longer-term security patches. TCL is a bit of an unknown there, so we're gonna have to see how they handle software support. This is going to be a really healthy year for competition in the sub $500 tier, and TCL is joining that tier in a pretty big way. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos. Sharing is super important these days, and subscribing to this channel. If you enjoy By the Benchmarks, let me hear about it down in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for future real-world tests to track, what are some other uses that we can observe and time to get a handle on smartphone power? If you would like to help support the production of future performance conversations, there are those links down below, or you might consider joining the list of names currently scrolling by on your screen. A growing community of fun, like-minded tech pals, a huge resource for me as I'm planning future videos and reviews. They're super cool people, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, Facebooks and the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.